A trusted friend opened his mouth, and suddenly Marcus's act of kindness looked like a crime. Marcus Reed thought he was doing something small. On a cold, rainy night in Detroit, he simply refused to leave an elderly woman alone at a bus stop. He gave her a place to sleep on his worn-out couch, never asking who she was or what she could offer in return. But 2 months after she passed away, a lawyer appeared at his door carrying a secret worth hundreds of millions of dollars. What Marcus was about to discover would force everyone around him to question what true wealth really means, and reveal how a single act of kindness can change more lives than anyone ever imagined. The black sedan looked like it had taken a wrong turn somewhere between downtown Detroit and the reality of Clement Street. It rolled slowly past cracked sidewalks, boarded storefronts, and apartment buildings that had seen better decades. Rainwater from the previous night still sat in potholes along the curb, reflecting gray clouds that hung low over the city. People noticed the car. In neighborhoods like this, people always noticed things that didn't belong. An elderly man sweeping the front steps of a corner market paused and watched. A woman carrying groceries slowed her pace. 2 teenagers sitting on bicycles glanced up from their phones. The sedan finally stopped in front of a worn 3-story apartment building with faded brick walls and rust-stained railings. The engine went quiet. A few seconds later, the rear door opened. A tall, white man stepped out. His charcoal suit probably cost more than most people in the building paid in rent for 2 months. His shoes gleamed. His silver watch caught the weak afternoon sunlight. He stood still for a moment and looked up at the building. Apartment 3C. The address matched. After all the years he had spent practicing law, Charles Bennett had learned to expect surprises. Still, standing in front of that building made him pause, because nothing about it looked connected to Eleanor Whitmore. Nothing at all. He adjusted the leather briefcase in his hand and started toward the entrance. The hallway smelled faintly of old paint, laundry detergent, and someone's dinner cooking 2 floors below. He climbed the stairs carefully. 1 flight, then another, then the 3rd. When he reached the top landing, he stopped in front of a faded blue door. Apartment 3C. For a few seconds, he simply stared at it. Then he knocked. Inside the apartment, Marcus Reed was asleep, or at least trying to be. He had worked another overnight shift at the warehouse near the river. 12 hours unloading freight containers. 12 hours of cold concrete floors. 12 hours of forklifts, fluorescent lights, and supervisors who acted like exhaustion was a character flaw. He had gotten home less than an hour ago. His work boots sat near the couch. His jacket hung over a kitchen chair. He had barely closed his eyes when the knocking started. The first knock blended into a dream. The second one didn't. The third made him sit upright. For a moment he was disoriented. Then he heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. Marcus rubbed his face. The living room was quiet except for the hum of an old refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. A small blanket lay folded neatly on one end of the couch. His eyes lingered on it longer than they should have. Then he stood and walked toward the door. "Coming," he called. When he opened it, he froze. The man standing there clearly wasn't lost, and he definitely wasn't selling anything. "Marcus Reed?" the stranger asked. His voice was calm, professional. Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah." The man offered a polite smile. "My name is Charles Bennett." He held up a business card. "I'm an attorney." Marcus frowned. An attorney? His first thought was that something had happened. Maybe an unpaid bill. Maybe some problem with the building. Maybe an issue with child support paperwork that somehow resurfaced years later. His stomach tightened immediately. Life had trained him to expect bad news. Good news rarely arrived wearing expensive suits. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked carefully. Charles studied him for a moment. Not judging, simply confirming. Then he said the words that changed the air between them. I represented a woman named Eleanor Whitmore. Marcus blinked. The name hit him like a distant echo. Eleanor. For a second he couldn't place it. Then the image appeared instantly. A frail woman. Gray hair. A tired smile. Rain running down a bus shelter window. The old sofa. The blanket. The coffee. His chest tightened. Charles continued. She passed away 2 months ago. Marcus looked down. I know. The answer came quietly. Because of course he knew. Every morning he walked past that empty space in the living room. Every morning he saw the corner of the couch where she used to sit drinking coffee before sunrise. Every morning something felt missing. The lawyer nodded. I was sorry to hear it. Marcus swallowed. Neither man spoke for a moment. Then Charles glanced down at his briefcase. When he looked up again, his expression had changed. It had become more formal, more deliberate. Mr. Reed, may I come inside? Marcus hesitated. Not because he was afraid, because confusion had completely taken over. Still, he stepped aside. Sure. Charles entered. The apartment was small, painfully ordinary. A modest kitchen, second-hand furniture, children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, a stack of school books on the dining table. Nothing about the place suggested wealth. Nothing about it suggested inheritance. Nothing about it suggested the conversation Charles had come to have. And yet here he was. Marcus closed the door behind him. From the hallway near the bedrooms came a small voice. Dad? Marcus turned. His daughter Mia appeared first. 8 years old. Messy hair. Oversized t-shirt. Sleepy eyes. A moment later, Caleb emerged behind her. 12 years old. Already taller than most kids his age. Always observant. Always quiet. Both children stopped when they saw the stranger. Mia moved instinctively closer to her father. Charles immediately softened. Sorry to interrupt your afternoon. Neither child answered. They simply watched him. Marcus rested a hand on Mia's shoulder. It's okay. Then he looked back toward Charles. What is this about? The lawyer set his briefcase on the table. For the first time, he seemed unsure where to begin, which was unusual. Charles Bennett spent his career delivering difficult conversations, but this one was different. Very different. Finally, he spoke. Mr. Reed, before Eleanor Whitmore passed away, she made several changes to her estate. Marcus frowned. Estate? The word sounded ridiculous attached to Eleanor. The woman he remembered had arrived carrying a worn pharmacy bag and almost nothing else. She had slept on a couch that sagged in the middle. She had thanked him for leftover soup. She had laughed when Mia insisted she join family movie night. Estate wasn't a word that belonged to her, at least not in his memory. Charles opened the briefcase. Inside were documents, folders, legal papers, far more paperwork than seemed necessary. Then he removed a single envelope, cream-colored, sealed. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The lawyer placed it carefully on the table. Eleanor Whitmore left specific instructions regarding you and your children. Silence filled the room. Caleb exchanged a glance with his sister. Marcus stared at the envelope. He didn't touch it, didn't move, didn't even blink. Because suddenly every memory of Eleanor seemed incomplete, as though there had been another version of her sitting quietly beneath the version they knew, a version hidden from all of them. Mr. Bennett, Marcus said slowly, what exactly are you telling me? The attorney met his eyes. And then he said the sentence that would divide Marcus Reed's life into two separate chapters. One before this moment, one after. I'm telling you, Mr. Reed, that Eleanor Whitmore left behind something she wanted you to have. Marcus looked at the envelope, then at the lawyer, then at the empty place on the couch. And for the first time since Eleanor's death, a question began forming in his mind. Not who she had been, not where she came from, not why she appeared at a bus stop in the rain, but something far stranger. Who was Eleanor Whitmore really, and why had she chosen him? The questions lingered in Marcus Reed's mind like echoes in an empty room. He stared at the cream-colored envelope sitting on the kitchen table. Mia sat quietly beside him. Caleb stood near the refrigerator with his arms crossed. Charles Bennett remained calm, patient, as though he understood that some truths needed time before they could be heard. Then everything seemed to fade. The apartment, the lawyer, the envelope. Marcus found himself drifting backward through memory. Back to a time before Eleanor. Back to a life that nobody would have considered remarkable. Back to the man he had been before a rainy night changed everything. 2 months earlier. Detroit looked different in February. The city seemed trapped between seasons. Dirty snow lingered in parking lots. Cold rain soaked cracked sidewalks. Gray skies hung low over aging buildings. Every morning Marcus woke before sunrise. Most days it was 4:15, sometimes earlier. The alarm on his phone buzzed softly from the folding table beside his couch. Not a bed. A couch. The same worn sofa that sat in his living room now. The same sofa where Eleanor would eventually sleep. Marcus rubbed his eyes and sat up. His back usually hurt. His knees complained. His shoulders felt older than 40. But there was never time to think about discomfort. Because Caleb and Mia needed breakfast. Bills needed paying. Life kept moving whether he was tired or not. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms. One belonged to the children. The other had become a study area because Marcus wanted them to have room to learn and dream. That left the couch for him. Some people pitied him for it. Marcus never did. The couch placed him closest to the front door, closest to the hallway, closest to his children if they called out during the night. That mattered more than comfort. He moved quietly through the kitchen, started coffee, packed lunches, checked homework folders, prepared breakfast. The routine never changed. There was safety in routine, especially after loss, especially after grief. The framed photograph on top of the refrigerator watched over everything. His wife, Danielle. She smiled from the picture exactly as she had smiled on the day it was taken. Warm, confident, alive. 5 years had passed since cancer took her. 5 years. Some mornings it felt like 50. Other mornings it felt like 5 minutes. Marcus still caught himself turning toward the passenger seat when he drove, still reached for a second coffee mug occasionally, still imagined what she would say when Caleb got stubborn or when Mia asked questions nobody could answer. The ache never completely disappeared. It simply learned how to live beside everything else. By 6 o'clock, the children were awake. Mia entered the kitchen first, always smiling, always talking. "Dad, did you know penguins can sleep standing up?" Marcus poured cereal into a bowl. "I didn't." "They can. That's impressive. I want to learn how." Marcus laughed. "You already fall asleep everywhere. I think you've mastered it." Mia grinned. A few moments later, Caleb appeared. Older, quieter, thoughtful. The kind of kid who noticed details nobody else noticed. He carried a notebook everywhere. Sketches filled every page. Bridges, buildings, mechanical designs, dreams disguised as pencil drawings. Marcus looked at him. Big math test today? Caleb nodded. You'll do fine. I know. Marcus smiled. That answer sounded exactly like his son. Not arrogant. Certain. The three of them ate breakfast together beneath flickering kitchen lights. Nothing fancy. Nothing expensive. But it was theirs. And Marcus protected those moments fiercely. Because life outside those walls often reminded him how little people expected from a man like him. The warehouse sat near the industrial district south of downtown. Rows of shipping containers stretched across acres of concrete. Forklifts beeped constantly. Engines roared. Workers moved through long shifts beneath harsh fluorescent lights. Marcus loaded freight, stacked inventory, moved pallets, did whatever needed doing. The work wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to survive. Barely. That morning, his supervisor stopped beside him, a man named Rick. You still doing deliveries after this shift? Marcus nodded. Got to. Rick shook his head. Man, you work too much. Marcus lifted another box. Not much choice. Rick shrugged. Guess not. Then he walked away. The conversation lasted less than 10 seconds, but Marcus knew what Rick meant. People often looked at him and saw exhaustion, struggle, limitation, a man barely keeping his head above water. Nobody saw the discipline behind it. Nobody saw the sacrifices. Nobody saw the thousands of small choices required to hold a family together. At noon, he finished his warehouse shift. By 1 o'clock, he was driving deliveries across the city. Groceries, packages, prescriptions, anything the app assigned. Sometimes wealthy neighborhoods, sometimes struggling ones. The contrast fascinated him. One street held million-dollar homes. The next contained abandoned buildings. One family worried about vacation plans. Another worried about keeping electricity on. Marcus moved between those worlds every day, invisible in both. That evening, after his final delivery, he stopped at New Hope Community Kitchen. The building stood beside an old church. The sign outside was faded. The parking lot was cracked. But inside, people found warmth. Food. Kindness. Sometimes dignity. Marcus volunteered 3 evenings a week, even when he was exhausted, even when common sense suggested he should go home and rest. Because years ago, after Danielle died, New Hope had helped him. A hot meal, a listening ear, someone who treated him like a human being instead of a problem. He never forgot that. Inside the kitchen, steam rose from giant pots of soup. Volunteers moved between tables. The smell of bread filled the air. Marcus, someone called. He turned. Mrs. Harper, 72 years old, tiny, fierce. She ran the kitchen like a military commander. You're late. Marcus smiled. Traffic. That's what everybody says. She handed him an apron. Get to work. For the next 2 hours, he served meals, refilled drinks, carried trays, listened to stories. Some guests were homeless, some elderly, some working 3 jobs and still struggling. Marcus treated every one of them the same, because he understood something many people didn't. Hard times could happen to anyone. All it took was one illness, one accident, one bad month, one loss. The line between stability and disaster was thinner than most people realized. Near closing time, Mrs. Harper watched him wiping tables. You know, she said quietly, most people in your position would spend every free minute chasing money. Marcus shrugged. Maybe. So why are you here? He looked around the room. At the empty chairs. At the volunteers cleaning up. At the people leaving with full stomachs. Then he answered, "Because somebody was here for me." Mrs. Harper nodded slowly, as if she had expected exactly that response. Outside, darkness had fallen. Rain tapped softly against parked cars. Marcus pulled his jacket tighter and started walking toward the grocery store. Milk, bread, eggs. Nothing exciting, just enough for the week. The store was nearly empty. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A radio played somewhere near the registers. Marcus bought discounted items from the clearance section, carefully calculating every dollar, carefully planning every expense, because that was how survival worked, not through miracles, through discipline. By the time he left the store, rain was falling harder, cold, steady, the kind that seeped into clothing, the kind that made people hurry home. Marcus tucked the grocery bag beneath his arm, then started walking. Streetlights reflected off wet pavement. Cars splashed through puddles. The city felt quiet, almost lonely. He was thinking about Caleb's math test, about Mia's science project, about the overdue electric bill sitting on the kitchen counter, about whether he could pick up an extra shift next week. His mind stayed busy, so busy that he nearly walked right past the bus shelter. Nearly. But something made him look. A movement. A shape. A person sitting alone beneath the dim light. An elderly woman. White hair. Thin coat. Small pharmacy bag resting beside her. Rainwater streaked down the glass walls of the shelter. People passed without stopping. Cars drove by without slowing. The woman simply sat there. Still. Quiet. Not begging. Not calling for help. Not asking for anything. Marcus slowed, then stopped. Something about her reminded him of the people he'd served at New Hope, people forgotten by everyone except circumstance. He stood there for several seconds, watching, thinking, knowing he should probably keep walking, knowing he had children waiting at home, knowing strangers carried risks. Then the woman lifted her eyes, and for the briefest moment, their gazes met through the rain. Marcus couldn't explain what he saw, only that it didn't look like surrender. It looked like loneliness, the kind that settled deep inside a person, the kind no amount of money could fix. He tightened his grip on the grocery bag, took a breath, and stepped toward the shelter. Without realizing it, he was about to change the course of his life forever. And somewhere inside that rain-soaked silence, Eleanor Whitmore was about to meet the only man who would ever offer her a home without first asking who she was. The rain tapped steadily against the glass walls of the bus shelter. Not a violent storm, not dramatic, just cold February rain that seemed determined to soak everything it touched. Marcus stepped closer. His boots splashed through shallow puddles gathered along the curb. The woman looked up. She couldn't have been younger than 75, maybe older. Her silver hair was damp around her temples. A thin navy coat hung loosely from her shoulders. The small pharmacy bag beside her looked worn from use. Nothing about her appearance suggested danger, but nothing explained why she was sitting there either. Most people would have kept walking. Marcus knew that. Truthfully, part of him wanted to. He had children waiting at home, an early shift tomorrow, bills to pay, responsibilities that never paused. He couldn't afford complications, yet something kept him rooted to the spot. The woman seemed oddly calm, not frightened, not desperate, not angry, just tired, as if she had traveled a very long distance and no longer cared where the road ended. "You okay, ma'am?" Marcus asked. The woman studied him. For several seconds, she didn't answer. Rainwater slid down the glass behind her. Traffic lights changed at the intersection nearby. A city bus passed without stopping. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was soft. educated, carefully measured. I suppose that depends on your definition of okay. Marcus almost smiled. That wasn't the answer he expected. Fair enough. The woman glanced toward the street. The buses stopped running an hour ago. You waiting for somebody? No. You got somewhere to stay? A pause. Then she answered, no. The honesty surprised him. Most people would have offered an explanation, an excuse, a story. She simply stated the truth. No place to stay. No self-pity attached. No attempt to gain sympathy. Marcus shifted his grocery bag to his other arm. Family nearby? The woman looked away. The expression on her face changed. Just slightly. But enough. Enough for Marcus to know he shouldn't ask again. No family, she said quietly. The traffic light changed again. Red, green, red. The city continued moving around them. Neither of them spoke. Then Marcus noticed something. Her hands. They trembled slightly. Not from fear, from cold. She was freezing, and she was trying very hard not to show it. A police cruiser rolled slowly through the intersection. The officer behind the wheel glanced toward the shelter. His eyes lingered on Marcus. A black man standing beside an elderly white woman. The officer slowed. Marcus noticed. The woman noticed too, but neither said anything. After a moment, the cruiser continued down the street. Marcus exhaled slowly. The woman looked at him. You don't have to stay. I know. You have groceries. I noticed. A faint smile touched her lips, the first hint of warmth he'd seen. Then why are you still here? Marcus looked down the empty street. He thought about walking away, thought about how much easier life would be if he minded his own business. Then he thought about Mia, about Caleb, about the lessons he tried to teach them every day. Kindness wasn't something you practiced only when it was convenient. Otherwise, it wasn't really kindness. It was comfort. There are enough people walking past already, he said. The woman looked at him for a long moment. Something unreadable moved behind her eyes. Not surprise, not gratitude. Something deeper. As if she hadn't heard words like that in a very long time. Marcus glanced toward the dark sky. The temperature was dropping. The rain wasn't stopping. He made a decision. A simple one. The kind of decision people make every day. The kind that rarely changes anything. Except sometimes it changes everything. My apartment isn't far. The woman remained silent. Marcus continued. It's not much. Another pause. But there's a couch. The woman stared at him. He could almost see the calculations happening behind her eyes. Trust, risk, pride, fear. Every stranger carried all four. You don't know me, she said. No. You don't know if I'm dangerous. Marcus laughed softly. Ma'am, if you wanted to rob somebody, I promise you picked the wrong neighborhood. For the first time, she actually smiled. A real smile. Brief, but genuine. Then it disappeared. My name is Eleanor. The introduction seemed important, like a gift, a small piece of trust being offered in return. Marcus. She nodded. Marcus? The rain continued falling. Finally, she asked the question. Why? Marcus frowned. Why what? Why offer? He thought about it. The answer wasn't complicated. My mother used to say something. Eleanor waited. Marcus looked down the street. She said every person is one bad month away from needing help. The old woman lowered her eyes. For a moment she said nothing. Then she picked up the pharmacy bag. Your mother sounds wise. Most moms are. Eleanor stood slowly. Marcus immediately noticed how unsteady she seemed. Not weak, not frail, just exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that settles into bones. He offered his arm. She hesitated, then accepted. Together they stepped out into the rain. The walk to the apartment took 15 minutes. Streetlights reflected off wet sidewalks. Cars hissed through puddles. Neon signs flickered above liquor stores and closed restaurants. For most of the walk, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. At one point, they passed New Hope Community Kitchen. The lights were still on inside. Volunteers cleaned tables through the front windows. Eleanor glanced toward the building. You volunteer there? Marcus looked surprised. How'd you know? The woman inside waved. Marcus laughed. Mrs. Harper had indeed waved at him through the glass. Nothing escaped this woman beside him. Yeah. Long time? A few years. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. Interesting. Marcus noticed she seemed interested in details. Not the obvious ones, the small ones, the things most people overlooked. A few blocks later, they reached the apartment building. Eleanor stopped and looked up. 3 floors, faded brick, old windows, nothing impressive. This is home? She asked. Marcus smiled. Most days. The staircase creaked beneath their weight. The hallway lights flickered. When they reached apartment 3C, Marcus unlocked the door. Warm air greeted them, along with the smell of tomato soup. Mia appeared almost instantly. Dad! Then she stopped. Her eyes widened. She looked at Eleanor, then back at Marcus, then back at Eleanor again. Children rarely hide what they're thinking. Who's that? Marcus removed his wet jacket. This is Eleanor. Mia stepped closer. Completely fearless. Hi. Hello? Mia studied her carefully. Are you hungry? Marcus almost laughed. No suspicion, no judgment. Just concern. Eleanor looked startled. Maybe a little. Mia nodded seriously. We have soup. Caleb emerged from his room. Unlike his sister, he immediately became cautious. His eyes moved from Eleanor to Marcus. A silent question. Marcus understood. It's okay. Caleb trusted his father, but uncertainty remained. Eleanor noticed. Of course she did. She seemed to notice everything. Marcus led her inside. The apartment suddenly felt smaller than usual, more crowded, more vulnerable. He wondered briefly if he'd made a mistake. The thought appeared and disappeared just as quickly. Because when Eleanor looked around the room, she didn't react the way some people did. She didn't see poverty. She didn't see worn furniture. She didn't see limitations. She looked at family photographs, school drawings, books stacked beside the couch, signs of life, signs of people. Nice home, she said quietly. Marcus almost corrected her, almost said it wasn't much. Then he stopped himself. Because maybe it was. Maybe home wasn't measured in square footage. Maybe it never had been. He pointed toward the couch. The left side sinks a little. Eleanor glanced at it. Only a little? Marcus smiled. Okay. A lot. For the first time that evening, she laughed. A soft laugh. Warm. Unexpected. And somehow the apartment felt different afterward, as though something invisible had crossed the threshold with her. Something neither of them understood yet. Something waiting patiently for the right moment. Later that night, after soup and introductions, after Mia asked approximately 27 questions, and Caleb watched cautiously from across the room, Eleanor settled onto the old couch. Marcus gave her an extra blanket, the same blanket that had once belonged to Danielle. He rarely shared it. Tonight he did. Eleanor pulled it around herself. Her fingers lingered on the fabric. "This is old. It belonged to my wife." The old woman looked up. Pain flickered briefly across her face. "I'm sorry." Marcus nodded. "Me too." Silence settled between them. A gentle silence. Then Eleanor lay back against the couch. Within minutes, her breathing slowed. She was asleep. Marcus stood in the kitchen doorway watching. A stranger, an elderly woman he had met less than an hour ago, sleeping beneath his roof, trusting him. The whole situation felt absurd, yet somehow it also felt right. He turned off the lights one by one. The apartment grew quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Marcus headed toward his own couch cushion on the opposite end, then paused. For a moment he looked at Eleanor sleeping peacefully beneath Danielle's blanket, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this woman carried a story much larger than she was willing to tell. A story hidden beneath years of silence. A story that had somehow led her here, to Detroit, to Clement Street, to apartment 3C, to his family. Marcus didn't know it yet, but before long strange details would begin appearing. Small clues, tiny cracks in Eleanor's carefully protected past, and when they did, he would discover that the woman sleeping on his couch was not who she appeared to be at all. The next morning began before sunrise. Marcus woke to the familiar sound of his alarm. For a moment, he forgot Eleanor was there. Then he sat up and saw the blanket folded neatly across the arm of the couch. The living room was empty. His heart skipped. He stood immediately. The apartment wasn't large enough for anyone to disappear. Yet the couch was vacant. The blanket had been folded with remarkable precision, not tossed aside, not abandoned. Folded, almost military. Marcus walked toward the kitchen. The smell hit him first. Coffee. Fresh coffee. He stopped in the doorway. Eleanor stood beside the counter. Steam drifted upward from the pot. She wore the same navy coat from the night before, though she'd somehow managed to make it look cleaner. A dish towel covered the coffee pot, the exact way Marcus usually covered it to keep the heat inside. She looked up. "Good morning." Marcus blinked. "You're awake." "So are you." He glanced at the clock. 4:38 a.m. "Most people don't get up this early." Eleanor lifted an eyebrow. "Most people don't unload freight trucks before sunrise." Marcus laughed softly. "Fair point." He poured himself a cup. The coffee was surprisingly good. Better than his. That annoyed him slightly. "You make coffee often?" Eleanor took a sip from her own mug. "Once or twice." Something about her answer sounded carefully chosen. Not dishonest, but incomplete. Marcus was beginning to notice that pattern. The children appeared 20 minutes later. Mia immediately smiled when she saw Eleanor. Caleb remained cautious. Not unfriendly, just observant. His mother's death had taught him not to trust permanence. People disappeared. Good things ended. Promises broke. Children learned those lessons differently than adults. Mia accepted people instantly. Caleb inspected them first. Eleanor seemed to understand this. She never pushed, never forced conversation, never tried winning him over, which somehow made Caleb trust her more. After breakfast, Marcus prepared to leave for work. Before he headed out, he paused near the door. "You sure you'll be okay today?" Eleanor nodded. "I've survived many days." Again. An answer that sounded ordinary, yet somehow wasn't. Marcus left. The warehouse shift dragged longer than usual. Cold air, heavy pallets, long hours. Yet Eleanor remained in the back of his mind. Not because he distrusted her, because he couldn't understand her. She didn't fit. Not in the apartment, not in the neighborhood, not in the story she appeared to be telling. That evening, after his second job, Marcus returned home carrying groceries. The first thing he noticed was laughter. Mia's laughter. Bright, unfiltered. The second thing he noticed was Caleb, laughing too. That was rarer. Much rarer. Marcus stepped inside. Mia sat at the kitchen table surrounded by crayons. Eleanor sat beside her. The old woman was helping her color a school project. Not doing it for her. Helping. As if she had all the time in the world. "What is this?" Marcus asked. Mia held up the paper proudly. "A city." Marcus looked closer. The drawing wasn't bad. Actually, it was surprisingly detailed. Roads, parks, buildings, bridges. One bridge in particular caught his attention. Caleb drew that. Mia pointed proudly. Caleb shrugged. Eleanor studied the drawing. Interesting design. The boy looked up. "You think so?" "I do." She pointed toward the bridge. "The support structure is strong." Caleb stared. Most adults simply called his drawings nice. They didn't analyze them. They certainly didn't discuss engineering. "You know about bridges?" he asked. Eleanor took another sip of tea. "A little." The answer seemed too small, far too small. Caleb noticed it too. Marcus noticed the look that passed between them. Another tiny crack. Another unanswered question. The following days settled into an unexpected routine. One day became 3. 3 became 6. Then a week. Eleanor remained. Not because she asked. Not because Marcus insisted. Simply because neither knew where else she should go. Something else happened too. The apartment changed. Subtly. Quietly. The way a room changes when someone opens a window. Mia began showing Eleanor her homework. Caleb brought out more sketches. Marcus found himself talking during dinner instead of eating in silence. The loneliness that had settled over the apartment since Danielle's death seemed slightly lighter. Not gone. Never gone. Just lighter. One evening, Mrs. Gloria appeared. The elderly neighbor from apartment 3A. She knocked twice before entering. Mrs. Gloria never waited for invitations. She carried a container of cornbread. And suspicion. Mostly suspicion. Her eyes immediately found Eleanor. So she's still here. The room went quiet. Marcus sighed. "Evening, Gloria." The older woman ignored him. Her attention remained fixed on Eleanor. "You got family?" Eleanor smiled politely. "No." "Job?" "No." "Social Security?" Marcus rubbed his forehead. "Gloria." "What? You interrogating guests now?" "I'm protecting my neighbors." Eleanor surprised everyone, including Marcus. She laughed. Not mockingly, warmly. Mrs. Gloria narrowed her eyes. "Something funny?" Eleanor shook her head. "You remind me of someone I used to know." "Good person?" "No." The apartment exploded with laughter. Even Gloria smiled, though she tried hiding it. The tension eased, for a while. But the questions remained. A few days later, another complication appeared. The landlord, Mr. Hansen, a man who always looked irritated, even when things were going well. Especially when things were going well. Marcus was carrying groceries upstairs when Hansen stopped him. Need to talk. Marcus already knew that tone. Never good. What happened? I heard you've got somebody staying there. Marcus sighed. Temporary. Temporary turns permanent. She's an old woman. Hansen crossed his arms. Old women can sue. Marcus stared. What? If she falls, gets hurt, claims something. Marcus couldn't believe the conversation. The landlord continued. Look, Marcus, I'm not running a shelter. Something inside Marcus tightened. Not anger. Disappointment. The familiar kind. The kind that came when people looked at vulnerable human beings and saw inconvenience instead. She's got nowhere else. Not my problem. Marcus met his eyes. Maybe that's the problem. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Hansen shook his head. Just don't make this my headache. He walked away. Marcus climbed the stairs slowly. The encounter lingered, because he'd seen it before. People judging without knowing. People assuming the worst. People measuring human worth by usefulness. When he entered the apartment, Eleanor immediately noticed. You look troubled. Marcus dropped the groceries on the counter. Landlord. She nodded, as if that explained everything. Maybe it did. She spent a long moment looking out the window. Rain tapped softly against the glass again. Detroit seemed permanently gray that month. Then she said something strange. Some people become wealthy and spend their lives protecting what they own. Marcus unpacked groceries. Yeah. They become so busy protecting things they forget how to protect people. Marcus stopped. That didn't sound like something a homeless woman would say. Not exactly. It sounded personal. Experience speaking. He looked at her. Eleanor remained focused on the rain. The conversation ended there. But the words stayed with him. A few nights later, another clue emerged. Small, almost invisible. Marcus found Eleanor watching television, a financial news channel. Stock prices moved across the bottom of the screen. Corporate earnings, CEO interviews, the kind of programming Marcus never watched. The anchor mentioned a merger involving a major investment firm. Before the analyst on screen could finish speaking, Eleanor quietly said, That won't work. Marcus looked over. What won't? The merger. She pointed toward the television. The debt ratio is wrong. Marcus stared. A few seconds later, the analyst on TV said exactly the same thing. Word for word. Marcus slowly turned toward her. Eleanor reached for the remote, clicked off the television. Too quickly. Far too quickly. The room became silent. Neither acknowledged what had happened. But another crack had appeared. And this one was larger. Much larger. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. The apartment was dark. The refrigerator hummed quietly. Rain tapped against the windows. From the couch across the room came the steady rhythm of Eleanor's breathing. He stared at the ceiling, thinking, remembering, questioning. Who was she? Why did she know things she shouldn't know? Why did she speak like someone who once sat in boardrooms instead of bus shelters? Why did she seem completely unsurprised by subjects most people never understood? The answers remained hidden. For now. But somewhere beyond those unanswered questions, a much bigger truth waited. A truth connected to a name, a company, a fortune, and a life Eleanor had spent years trying to leave behind. The next clue would come from Caleb's notebook, and when it did, Marcus would begin realizing that the woman sleeping on his old couch had once belonged to a world so different from theirs that it almost seemed impossible. The following Saturday arrived wrapped in gray skies and steady rain. Detroit seemed trapped beneath clouds that month. The kind of weather that turned every window into a mirror and every street into a river of reflections. Marcus was home for once. No warehouse shift, no deliveries, no rushing from one responsibility to another. Just a rare morning inside apartment 3C. The smell of coffee drifted through the rooms. By now, that smell had become part of the apartment's rhythm. Eleanor was always awake first. Always. Marcus had stopped trying to understand how a woman in her 70s consistently woke before everyone else. He simply accepted it. When he entered the kitchen that morning, she was already sitting at the table. A mug of coffee rested beside her. A newspaper lay open in front of her. Not the entertainment section, not local gossip. Business news. Economic reports. Market summaries. The pages looked oddly natural in her hands, like they belonged there, like she'd spent years reading them. She folded the paper as Caleb entered the room carrying his notebook. The notebook rarely left his side. Marcus sometimes joked that if the apartment caught fire, Caleb would save the notebook before anything else. The boy sat down at the table, opened it, and immediately disappeared into his own world. Pencil moving, lines forming, ideas taking shape. Eleanor watched quietly. After several minutes, she spoke. "May I see it?" Caleb looked up. Marcus expected hesitation. Instead, the boy slid the notebook across the table. Eleanor accepted it carefully, almost reverently, as though she understood that creative work was fragile. She turned the pages slowly. Bridge sketches, structural concepts, suspension systems, support beams, cross-sections, page after page. Marcus smiled. Most adults flipped through the notebook and offered polite encouragement. "Nice drawing. Looks good. Keep it up." Eleanor wasn't doing that. She was studying. Actually studying. Then she stopped. Page 23. A large suspension bridge. One Caleb had been working on for months. She leaned closer, examining every line, every angle, every support. Finally, she looked at him. "This section here." She pointed to the central support tower. Caleb immediately straightened. "What about it?" "The load distribution." The boy blinked. Marcus blinked too. Eleanor continued. "If a heavy wind came through from this direction," she gently tapped the edge of the page, "the stress would build here first." She pointed to a connection point. Caleb stared. His eyes widened. Because she was right. Marcus could tell from his son's reaction. Not because he understood engineering, because Caleb never looked surprised. And right now he looked stunned. The boy grabbed a pencil, started calculating, erasing, redrawing. For nearly 10 minutes he worked in complete silence. Finally he sat back. "Oh," Eleanor smiled. "What, you were right." A strange expression crossed her face. Pride. Not pride in herself. Pride in him. The kind grandparents often wear when watching children discover something important. "You're very good," she said. Caleb lowered his eyes. Most compliments embarrassed him. Eleanor seemed to understand that too. She didn't push, didn't overpraise, just returned the notebook. The moment passed. Yet Marcus couldn't stop thinking about it. How did a homeless woman know structural engineering? How did she identify design flaws in seconds? And why did she keep revealing pieces of knowledge that didn't match the story she appeared to be living? That afternoon, Mia dragged Eleanor into another project. This time it involved repairing a winter coat. The zipper had broken. The sleeve was tearing. The coat itself had survived years longer than it probably should have. Marcus planned to replace it eventually, when money allowed, which usually meant never. Without a word, Eleanor sat beside Mia on the couch. Needle, thread, patience. An hour later, the coat looked almost new. Mia held it up proudly. "You fixed it!" Eleanor smiled. "I helped?" "No. You fixed it." The little girl wrapped her arms around Eleanor unexpectedly. The older woman froze, not because she disliked affection, because she wasn't prepared for it. Marcus noticed immediately. Something softened inside Eleanor. Something old. Something lonely. She slowly hugged Mia back. And for a brief second, Marcus saw sadness in her eyes. Deep sadness. The kind built over years. The kind people carried when they missed someone they could never get back. Later that evening, while making dinner, Marcus decided to ask a question. Not an aggressive question. Not an interrogation. Just curiosity. "You ever have kids?" The kitchen fell quiet. The sound of boiling water filled the room. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She stood near the sink looking out the window. Rain traced lines down the glass. No. The answer was simple. Too simple. Marcus waited. Sometimes silence encouraged honesty. After several moments, she added, "I wanted them once." The words carried weight. Years of it. "What happened?" Eleanor smiled faintly. A sad smile. The same thing that happens to many plans. She looked back toward him. "Life happened." Marcus nodded. He understood that. More than most. Neither spoke again. The conversation ended there. But another small piece of her past had surfaced. Not enough to explain her. Just enough to deepen the mystery. The following week brought another surprise. Marcus returned home from work one evening and found Eleanor sitting at the kitchen table with Mia. The television was on. A business network. An interview with a famous CEO. The man was discussing expansion plans, investments, corporate strategy. Marcus barely paid attention. Then he heard Eleanor laugh. Not loudly, just a short, amused sound. Marcus looked over. "What?" She shook her head. "Nothing." Didn't sound like nothing. The CEO continued speaking. Confident. Polished. Certain. Eleanor watched him for another moment. Then she quietly said, "He always did underestimate risk." Marcus stopped unpacking groceries. "What?" She pointed toward the television. "Him. You know him?" The question escaped before Marcus could stop it. For a split second, Eleanor's expression changed. A mistake. A tiny crack. Something vulnerable. Then it vanished. No. Too quick. Far too quick. The interview ended. The next segment began. But Marcus couldn't let it go. Because the woman who supposedly had nowhere to go seemed oddly familiar with people who ran billion-dollar companies. And the explanation no longer made sense. A few nights later, another clue arrived. This one impossible to ignore. Marcus walked into the living room after putting away dishes. The television was muted. Financial news again. Numbers scrolled across the screen. Stock prices. Corporate announcements. Market updates. Eleanor sat perfectly still. A logo appeared during a segment introduction. Whitmore Capital. The words flashed across the screen for less than 3 seconds. But the effect on Eleanor was immediate. She reached for the remote, clicked the television off. The room went dark. Marcus stared. Eleanor stared at the blank screen. Neither moved. What was that? She looked toward him. What was what? That company. No response. Whitmore Capital. Still silence. Marcus stepped closer. Why'd you turn it off? Eleanor looked away. For the first time since arriving at the apartment, she seemed genuinely uncomfortable. Not afraid. Not defensive. Sad. Deeply sad. After a long pause, she finally spoke. Have you ever spent years building something? Her voice remained soft, only to realize it became something you no longer recognized. Marcus frowned. The answer sounded strangely personal. Maybe. She nodded. Then you understand. No, Eleanor. He looked directly at her. I don't. The room became quiet. Outside, rain tapped against the windows. Inside, neither spoke. Then Eleanor stood, slowly, carefully, and walked toward the hallway. The conversation was over, at least for now. But the mystery wasn't. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. The apartment was dark. The old refrigerator hummed. Cars passed occasionally outside. His thoughts circled endlessly. The bridge correction, the business knowledge, the CEO, Whitmore Capital. Every clue pointed toward the same conclusion. Eleanor wasn't who she claimed to be. The question wasn't whether she had a past. Everyone had a past. The question was how large that past truly was, and how far she had fallen from it. Across the room, Eleanor slept beneath Danielle's old blanket. Peaceful, still, almost fragile. Yet Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere beyond that quiet face existed a story bigger than anything he had imagined. A story connected to money, power, loss, and choices made long ago. He didn't know it yet, but someone else was about to become part of that story. Someone who would accidentally set events into motion. Someone Marcus trusted. Someone named Derek. And before long, that trust would become a problem neither of them saw coming. Derek Lawson had been part of Marcus Reed's life for nearly a decade. Some friendships arrived slowly. Others happened in a single afternoon and somehow never left. Derek belonged to the second category. They had met during one of the hardest years of Marcus's life. The year after Danielle died. The year bills piled up faster than hope. The year Marcus learned what loneliness actually felt like. Derek had been there through all of it, helping him move apartments, picking Caleb up from school when work ran late, showing up with groceries when Marcus didn't ask, watching football games on old weekends when neither man could afford to go anywhere. Trust didn't happen overnight. Trust happened one small favor at a time, which was why Marcus eventually made the mistake. It happened on a Thursday night. The children were asleep. Rain tapped softly against the apartment windows. Eleanor sat in the living room reading one of Caleb's engineering magazines. Marcus stood on the fire escape outside the building talking to Derek. The city stretched around them in layers of wet pavement and yellow streetlights. Derek leaned against the railing. So let me get this straight. Marcus sighed. Don't start. You found an old lady at a bus stop. Yeah. You brought her home. Yeah. She's still there. Marcus nodded. Derek stared at him. You know how crazy that sounds, right? Marcus laughed. Trust me. I know. For a while they simply stood there, watching traffic below, listening to distant sirens. Then Derek asked the question everyone eventually asked. Who is she? Marcus shook his head. I honestly don't know. She never tells you anything? Not much. That's weird. I know. Marcus hesitated. Then he said something he probably shouldn't have. She knows things. Derek frowned. What kind of things? Marcus thought about Whitmore Capital, the bridge designs, the CEOs, the business news, the way Eleanor spoke about wealth as if she'd spent years standing next to it. Things she shouldn't know. Derek looked interested immediately. Marcus should have stopped talking. Instead, he kept going. Because carrying questions alone becomes exhausting. Sometimes people simply need someone to talk to, even if it turns out to be the wrong person. I think she used to be somebody important. Derek laughed. Everybody used to be somebody important according to themselves. No, I'm serious. Marcus described a few of the strange moments. Nothing specific, nothing harmful. Just enough to explain why he was confused. Derek listened carefully. Too carefully. When Marcus finished, his friend looked thoughtful. You think she had money? I don't know. You think she's hiding from somebody? I don't know. You think... Marcus interrupted. I don't know anything. Silence returned. Rain continued falling. Finally, Derek nodded. Fair enough. The conversation ended there, or at least Marcus thought it did. The next morning, Derek stopped by a diner near the warehouse, a small place where local workers gathered before shifts. Coffee, eggs, cheap breakfast specials. Nothing fancy. Just familiar. Derek sat in a booth with two acquaintances. The conversation drifted from sports to local news, then somehow toward Marcus, then toward Eleanor. At first, Derek said very little. Then someone asked questions. Then someone else offered theories. Then curiosity took over. By the time breakfast ended, 3 people knew about the mysterious old woman living in Marcus's apartment. None of them intended harm. That was the problem. Most rumors don't begin with cruelty. They begin with curiosity. By evening, 6 people knew. 2 days later, 20. Within a week, the story had spread through half the neighborhood, and every version became stranger. Some claimed Eleanor was secretly wealthy. Others claimed she was hiding from family. One version suggested Marcus had convinced an elderly woman to move in so he could gain control of her finances. Another suggested she was mentally confused. The truth disappeared beneath speculation, as truth often does. Marcus discovered the rumor on a Monday afternoon. He was carrying groceries upstairs when Mrs. Gloria stopped him. The look on her face told him immediately that something had changed. You hear what people are saying? Marcus frowned. No. Mrs. Gloria crossed her arms. Good. Why? Because it'll make you mad. Too late. Marcus was already worried. What are they saying? The older woman hesitated. Then she told him. Every version, every rumor, every accusation. Marcus stood completely still. At first he felt confused, then disappointed, then angry. Not because strangers were talking. People always talked, because someone had started it. Someone he trusted. The realization arrived immediately. Derek. It had to be Derek. Nobody else knew enough details. Marcus climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. Inside the apartment, Eleanor sat at the table helping Mia with spelling words. Everything looked peaceful, normal, safe. Marcus hated that the outside world was trying to poison it. Everything okay? Eleanor asked. Marcus forced a smile. Yeah, but she knew better. She always knew better. That evening, another knock came at the door. Then another. Then another. The first was a neighbor. The second was someone Marcus barely knew. The third was a woman asking questions about Eleanor's family. By the weekend, curiosity had become intrusion. People lingered outside the building. They watched, whispered, speculated. Marcus felt protective in a way that surprised him, not because Eleanor needed protection, because she deserved dignity, and dignity was becoming harder to preserve. Then things got worse. On Saturday morning, a police cruiser pulled up outside the building. Not an emergency, not lights and sirens, just questions. 2 officers knocked politely. Marcus answered. One officer glanced toward Eleanor. Sir, we've received concerns regarding the welfare of an elderly resident staying here. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Of course. Someone had reported something. The officers remained professional, respectful. Still, the experience stung, because once again, Marcus found himself being viewed through suspicion instead of kindness. The interview lasted 15 minutes, nothing more. The officers quickly realized there was no problem. Eleanor answered every question calmly, clearly, intelligently. When they left, one officer even apologized. But the damage lingered. After the door closed, silence filled the apartment. Mia looked worried. Caleb looked angry. Marcus looked exhausted. Then Eleanor spoke. You should ask me to leave. The words landed like a stone. Marcus turned immediately. What? You should. No. The rumors will stop. Marcus shook his head. No. They won't stop while I'm here. For a moment, Eleanor looked older than usual. Not physically, emotionally, like someone who had spent years walking away before they could become someone else's burden. Marcus understood that look. He'd seen it before. In hospital waiting rooms, in grieving parents, in lonely people, people who convinced themselves they were easier to lose than keep. No. His voice remained firm. Eleanor looked surprised. Marcus continued. Mia would cry. That earned the smallest smile. Caleb would pretend not to care. Another smile. And I'd spend the next 10 years wondering where you ended up. The apartment became quiet. Then Eleanor lowered her eyes. For a brief moment, emotion crossed her face. Real emotion. Not carefully controlled. Not hidden. Gratitude. And sadness. Deep sadness. I haven't had many people stay, she said quietly. Marcus pulled out a chair and sat down. Then maybe it's time somebody did. The conversation ended there. But something changed afterward. The walls between them grew thinner. Not gone. Just thinner. Yet outside the apartment, the rumors continued spreading. And somewhere beyond Detroit, beyond Clement Street, beyond the small life Marcus had built for himself, forces connected to Eleanor's past were already moving. Neither of them knew it yet. But very soon, a medical emergency would bring hidden truths closer to the surface. And for the first time since arriving at apartment 3C, Eleanor Whitmore would no longer be able to hide how serious her situation truly was. The first sign appeared on a Tuesday evening. It was subtle, so subtle that nobody except Marcus noticed. Eleanor dropped a coffee mug, not because she was careless, because her hand suddenly lost strength. The mug slipped from her fingers and shattered across the kitchen floor. For a brief moment, everyone froze. Mia looked up from her coloring book. Caleb stopped sketching. Marcus immediately stood. Eleanor. The older woman stared at the broken pieces. Her face had gone pale, far paler than usual. I'm fine. The answer came too quickly, too automatically. Marcus didn't believe it. Neither did Caleb. Eleanor pressed one hand against the edge of the counter, steadying herself, trying to regain control. The moment passed after a few seconds. Color returned to her face. Her breathing slowed. And once again she insisted she was fine. But Marcus saw something in her eyes. Fear. Not dramatic fear. Not panic. Recognition. The kind of fear that comes when something familiar returns, something expected, something unavoidable. That night he couldn't stop thinking about it. The apartment felt unusually quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windows again. Detroit seemed determined to stay gray forever. Marcus sat alone in the kitchen after everyone went to sleep. A single lamp illuminated the room. The broken mug had already been cleaned. Yet the image remained in his mind. The trembling hand, the sudden weakness, the look on Eleanor's face. Something was wrong. Something much bigger than she was admitting. The next morning, she acted normal, almost too normal. She made coffee, helped Mia prepare for school, reviewed one of Caleb's bridge sketches, smiled when Marcus left for work. But now he was watching carefully. And once you start noticing something, it's impossible to stop. The signs were everywhere. She moved slower. She ate less. She seemed exhausted after simple tasks. Several times he caught her staring out the window with a distant expression, as though she were counting something, or waiting. 3 days later, everything changed. Marcus returned home after a long shift. The hallway outside apartment 3C smelled faintly of rain and old carpet. He unlocked the door. Immediately, something felt wrong. The television wasn't on. Mia wasn't talking. Caleb wasn't drawing. The apartment was silent. Too silent. Then he heard Mia's voice. "Dad!" Not frightened, but worried. Marcus hurried inside. Mia stood near the kitchen, Caleb beside her. Both children looked pale. Marcus followed their gaze. Eleanor lay on the floor, conscious, barely. One hand pressed against her chest, her breathing shallow, uneven. The color had drained from her face. For a split second, Marcus froze. Then instinct took over. "Eleanor!" He dropped to his knees beside her. Her eyes opened, focused on him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The words broke his heart, because they sounded less like pain and more like apology, as if she regretted becoming someone else's problem. "Don't talk." Marcus grabbed his phone. "We're going to the hospital. No." The answer came immediately, stronger than anything else she'd said. "No hospitals." Marcus stared. "What?" "No hospitals." "Eleanor, you're having a medical emergency." She shook her head weakly. "No hospitals." For a moment, frustration flashed through him. Not anger, fear, the kind that makes people desperate. "You don't get to decide that." A faint smile appeared. "Actually," she paused to catch her breath. "I do." Marcus wasn't listening. The ambulance arrived 9 minutes later, the longest 9 minutes of his life. Mia sat beside Eleanor holding her hand. Caleb stood near the door pretending to be calm. Marcus paced, prayed, waited. When the paramedics arrived, Eleanor finally stopped arguing. Perhaps because she lacked the strength. Perhaps because she knew the fight was over. The ambulance lights reflected across rain-soaked streets as Marcus followed behind in his car. Detroit blurred past. Traffic lights, gas stations, closed storefronts. Everything felt distant, unreal. At the hospital, doctors moved quickly. Nurses asked questions. Machines beeped. Forms appeared. Time stretched. Marcus sat in a waiting room beneath harsh fluorescent lights. The children sat beside him. Nobody spoke much. Mia leaned against his shoulder. Caleb stared at the floor. Hours passed. Finally, a doctor appeared. Middle-aged, kind eyes, tired expression. The look of someone who had delivered difficult news many times. "You family?" Marcus hesitated. "No." The answer felt wrong somehow. The doctor nodded. "She's listed you as her emergency contact." Marcus blinked. "What?" The doctor looked surprised. "That's what's in her records." Records. The word hit him immediately. Records. Not temporary information. Not something created recently. Medical records. Meaning Eleanor had prepared for this. Meaning she knew. Meaning she'd been expecting something like this all along. The doctor continued. "She's stable for now." Relief flooded through Marcus, then vanished. Because the doctor's expression didn't improve. However, there it was. The word nobody wanted to hear. She suffers from a rare cardiac condition. Marcus listened. Heart disease, complications, progression. Years of treatment. Years. Not weeks. Not months. Years. The doctor wasn't describing a sudden illness. He was describing a long battle. A battle Eleanor had been fighting alone. "Can it be treated?" Marcus asked. The doctor hesitated, then answered carefully. "Treatment options exist." Something about the wording bothered him. "What does that mean?" The doctor's eyes shifted. Toward the hospital room. Then back. "It means she stopped pursuing most treatments quite some time ago." Marcus stared. Stopped? She had chosen this? The doctor nodded gently. She's been managing the condition for years. Years. Marcus felt the weight of that word. Years of appointments. Years of decisions. Years of secrets. Years of preparing for an ending nobody else could see. When he finally entered Eleanor's room, she looked smaller somehow. Hospital beds did that. Machines did that. They reduced people, stripped away everything except vulnerability. Rain streaked down the window behind her. Night had fallen. City lights shimmered beyond the glass. Eleanor opened her eyes when he entered. "You look terrible," she said. Marcus laughed despite himself. "You nearly scared us to death." A faint smile appeared. "Sorry." There was that apology again. Marcus pulled up a chair. For several moments, neither spoke. The room hummed softly with medical equipment. Finally, he broke the silence. "You knew." Eleanor looked toward the ceiling. "Yes." "How long?" "A long time." Marcus exhaled slowly. "You should have told us." She turned toward him. The sadness in her eyes seemed endless. What good would that have done? The answer frustrated him, because part of him understood it. Part of him didn't. Then Eleanor reached toward the bedside drawer, her movements slow, deliberate. She removed a small white card. Simple. Unremarkable. Only a name and phone number. Nothing else. She handed it to him. Marcus looked down. Charles Bennett, attorney at law. A phone number. No address. No explanation. No details. "Who is this?" Eleanor watched him carefully. "If I don't wake up one day..." Marcus immediately shook his head. "No." "Marcus." "No." "Listen." The firmness in her voice surprised him. She rarely raised it. Now she did. For a moment he saw the person she used to be, whoever that person was. Powerful. Certain. Used to being heard. "If something happens," she said quietly. Call him first. Marcus stared at the card. Why? A long silence followed. Then Eleanor answered, Because he knows everything. The words settled heavily between them. Everything. Not some things. Everything. Marcus looked back up. Family? For the first time since he'd met her, Eleanor's composure cracked. Only slightly. But enough. Her eyes filled. Not dramatically. Just enough to catch the light. The sight shocked him. He had never seen her cry. Not once. Do you have family? He asked softly. Eleanor looked away. Toward the rain outside. Toward the city lights. Toward memories only she could see. When she finally answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. Not anymore. Nothing else. No names. No story, no explanation. Just 3 words. Not anymore. Marcus didn't ask another question. Some pain announced itself clearly enough. The room fell silent again. The card remained in his hand. Charles Bennett. The name meant nothing, yet somehow Marcus knew it would, because whatever truth Eleanor had spent months hiding, whatever life existed before the bus stop, whatever reason she ended up alone in the rain, the answer was connected to that card, and sooner or later, the truth would have to come out. Neither of them knew just how soon that moment would arrive, because within days, Eleanor would make a decision that would bring her back to apartment 3C, back to the old couch, back to the family that had unknowingly become the final chapter of her life. Eleanor remained in the hospital for 3 days. 3 days that felt much longer. Marcus visited every evening after work. Mia brought drawings. Caleb brought pages from his notebook. The nurses quickly learned their names. By the second day, one of them joked that the family had practically moved into the waiting room. Marcus smiled when he heard it. Then he realized something. Nobody had corrected her. Not Eleanor. Not the children. Not even him. Because somewhere along the way, the relationship had changed. The woman from the bus stop was no longer a stranger. She had become part of the rhythm of their lives, part of breakfast conversations, part of homework sessions, part of ordinary evenings. And ordinary things were often the hardest to lose. On the 3rd afternoon, Marcus arrived to find Eleanor sitting upright in bed, dressed, shoes on, a small overnight bag beside her. His stomach tightened immediately. What are you doing? Leaving, no. Eleanor smiled. You sound like my doctor. That's because your doctor is right. She looked toward the window. Rain slid slowly down the glass. Detroit's skyline sat beneath another blanket of gray clouds. I don't belong here. Marcus pulled a chair closer. You're sick, I'm dying. The words landed heavily between them. Simple. Calm. Terrifying. Marcus stared at her. She rarely spoke so directly. Maybe never. For several moments, neither said anything. The beeping monitor beside her bed filled the silence. Finally, Marcus shook his head. You don't know that. A sad smile touched her lips. Oh, Marcus. The way she said his name carried years inside it. Years of acceptance. Years of understanding things she wished weren't true. I know exactly that. The room became very quiet. Not because there was nothing to say, because there was too much. Marcus looked away first, toward the hallway, toward the nurses passing by, toward anything except the reality sitting in front of him. Eleanor saved him, as she often did. I don't want my last memories to smell like disinfectant. He looked back. What? She glanced around the room. The machines, the fluorescent lights, the endless white walls. I've spent enough time in hospitals. Her voice softened. I don't want to spend whatever time I have left inside one. Marcus understood immediately. Not because he agreed, because he understood. There was a difference. After Danielle became sick, hospitals had become their second home. He remembered every waiting room, every procedure, every conversation that started with hope and ended with statistics. He remembered the smell, the lighting, the exhaustion. Most of all, he remembered how quickly hospitals could make people feel like patients instead of people. Eleanor was asking for something simple. She wanted to feel human, for whatever time remained. The doctor strongly disagreed. Marcus listened to a 10-minute explanation filled with medical terminology. Monitoring, treatment options, risk factors, recommendations. Every point made perfect sense. Every point sounded reasonable. Yet when the conversation ended, Eleanor simply smiled and said, I appreciate your concern. The doctor sighed. Marcus almost laughed, because he recognized that expression. The doctor had just discovered something Marcus already knew. Eleanor Whitmore looked fragile, but she possessed the stubbornness of a mountain. 3 hours later, they drove home. The rain had finally stopped. The city looked washed clean beneath pale afternoon sunlight. Mia sat beside Eleanor in the back seat, talking non-stop, telling stories from school, discussing a science project, explaining why volcanoes were more interesting than dinosaurs. Eleanor listened to every word. Actually listened. The way people do when they know time matters. When they reached the apartment building, Mrs. Gloria spotted them immediately. She practically appeared from nowhere, hands on hips, concern written across her face. You gave everybody a scare. Eleanor smiled. I apologize. Mrs. Gloria pointed a finger at her. No, you don't. Eleanor Woosh considered this, then laughed. No, I suppose I don't. The older woman shook her head, but she was smiling too. That evening felt different, not sad, not exactly, more precious, as if everyone understood something important without saying it aloud. Marcus ordered takeout instead of cooking, a rare luxury, nothing expensive, just burgers and fries from a local diner. Mia declared it a celebration. Caleb pretended not to care, then ate more fries than anyone else. Eleanor sat at the table watching them, a quiet smile never leaving her face. At one point, Mia asked a question. The kind only children ask, the kind adults spend entire lives avoiding. Eleanor? Yes? Why don't you ever talk about your family? The room froze. Marcus nearly dropped his drink. Caleb looked horrified. Mia remained completely unaware. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her hands, then toward the window. The sunset painted the glass orange. Finally, she spoke. Because sometimes talking about people you miss makes you miss them more. Mia thought about that. Seriously, as children do. Then she nodded. Okay, that was enough for her. The conversation moved on, but Marcus noticed something. Eleanor's eyes remained fixed on the fading sunlight, and for a brief moment they glistened. Later that night, after the children went to bed, Marcus found her sitting alone in the living room. The old couch creaked softly beneath her. The lamp beside her cast warm yellow light across the room. The same room where she'd first slept after the bus stop. The same room that somehow felt less empty now. Marcus sat down across from her. Neither spoke immediately. The city hummed quietly outside. Finally, Eleanor broke the silence. "Do you know what I envy about you?" Marcus laughed. "Me?" "Yes. That might be the first time anyone's ever said that." She smiled. "I'm serious." Marcus leaned back. "Okay. What do you envy?" She looked toward the hallway where Caleb and Mia slept. "The noise." Marcus frowned. "The noise? The breakfasts." A pause. "The arguments about homework." Another pause. "The way Mia asks 20 questions before anyone finishes answering the first one." Marcus smiled. That sounded accurate. Eleanor continued. "The way Caleb pretends not to care when he actually cares very deeply." Her voice softened. "The way someone always needs you." The room became still. Marcus suddenly understood. Not completely, but enough. This wasn't about money, or success, or status. This was about loneliness, the deep kind, the kind that survived every achievement, every accomplishment, every victory. Eleanor stared at the family photographs hanging near the hallway. "You have something very valuable." Marcus followed her gaze. "I don't have much." She looked at him. The sadness in her eyes nearly broke his heart. "That's where you're wrong." Neither spoke again for a long time. That night, Marcus checked on her before going to sleep, a habit he hadn't realized he'd developed. She was already asleep, one hand resting on the blanket, breathing slowly, peacefully. For the first time since leaving the hospital, she looked comfortable, at home. Marcus stood in the doorway for several seconds, watching, thinking, worrying, because despite the laughter, despite the takeout dinner, despite the warm apartment, something had changed. The hospital had revealed a truth nobody could ignore anymore. Time was no longer an abstract idea. Time had become visible, and somewhere inside Eleanor she knew it too. The days that followed became strangely beautiful. Breakfast conversations lasted longer. Coffee lasted longer. Evening walks became more meaningful. Nobody planned it. Nobody discussed it. But everyone seemed determined to hold on to ordinary moments, as if ordinary moments had suddenly become precious. And then one quiet morning, only a week after leaving the hospital, time finally ran out. The first person to realize it would not be Marcus. It would not be Caleb. It would be 8-year-old Mia. And what she would do next would become a memory Marcus carried for the rest of his life. The morning arrived quietly. No rain, no wind, no distant thunder rattling old windows, just soft April sunlight slipping through the curtains of apartment 3C, the kind of morning that looked ordinary, the kind people forgot. Until later. Until they realized it had changed everything. Mia woke first. That almost never happened. Usually Eleanor was already awake before everyone else. Usually the smell of coffee drifted through the apartment before sunrise. Usually, the old woman sat at the kitchen table with a blanket around her shoulders, watching the city wake up, but not that morning. The apartment felt strangely still. Mia rubbed her eyes. She padded down the hallway in oversized pajamas. The floor creaked beneath her small feet. Everything looked normal. The old couch, the lamp, the family photographs on the wall, the blanket Eleanor always used. Then Mia stopped. Eleanor was still lying on the couch. At first that didn't seem unusual. Then she noticed something. The coffee pot wasn't on, the kitchen light was off, and Eleanor hadn't moved. Not at all. Mia stood quietly. Children understand more than adults realize. Not always with words, not always with logic, but with instinct, with feeling, with the ability to recognize when something has changed. She slowly walked closer. The morning sunlight touched Eleanor's face, softly, gently. The older woman looked peaceful, more peaceful than Mia had ever seen her. Her hands rested atop the blanket, her expression calm, as if she had finally found the rest she'd been searching for. Mia waited. A few seconds, then a few more. The silence answered the question she hadn't wanted to ask. The little girl didn't scream. She didn't panic. She didn't run. Instead, she stood there quietly, remembering all the mornings Eleanor had covered the coffee pot with a dish towel to keep it warm. Remembering the way Eleanor folded blankets, the way she fixed coats, the way she listened, the way she made people feel important. Mia looked toward the kitchen. The dish towel still hung from the oven handle, exactly where Eleanor always left it. The little girl walked over, removed it carefully, then returned to the couch. With gentle hands, she laid the towel across her folded hands, the same way someone might place flowers beside a photograph, not because anyone had taught her, because it felt right, because love often understands things before words do. When she finished, she stood there for a moment. Then she walked quietly down the hallway. Caleb's bedroom door stood slightly open. She pushed it wider. Her brother looked up from bed, still half asleep. "Mia?" The little girl stared at him, tears finally beginning to fill her eyes. Not falling, just waiting. "She's gone." Caleb froze. The words hung in the room, heavy, impossible. Then understanding arrived. Slowly, painfully. The boy climbed out of bed. Neither child spoke. Together they walked back into the living room. Together they stood beside the couch. And together they said goodbye in silence. When Marcus's phone rang at work, he knew something was wrong immediately. Parents develop that instinct. The call came too early, too unexpectedly. He stepped away from the loading dock, answered. Caleb's voice met him, trying very hard to sound grown up, trying very hard not to break. "Dad." Marcus stopped moving. "What happened?" A pause. Then 3 words. "It's Eleanor." The world seemed to narrow. The warehouse disappeared. The noise disappeared. Everything disappeared except his son's voice. Marcus closed his eyes, because part of him already knew. Part of him had known since the hospital, known since the white card, known since the conversation beside the window, known since Eleanor looked at him and said she was tired. Still, knowing didn't make it easier. "I'll be home soon." He was already moving before he finished speaking, already heading toward the parking lot, already grabbing his keys. The drive back felt endless. Detroit rolled past in a blur of traffic lights and storefronts. Marcus barely noticed. His hands gripped the steering wheel. His mind replayed hundreds of memories. Coffee in the morning, conversations at dinner, Mia's laughter, Caleb's notebook, the old couch, the bus stop, the rain, a stranger, a friend, a family. 21 minutes later, he was climbing the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, his heart pounding, his breathing uneven. When he reached the apartment door, it was already open. Mrs. Gloria stood nearby, waiting. She didn't say anything, just placed a hand on his shoulder as he passed. Inside, the apartment felt impossibly quiet. The paramedics had already arrived. They moved respectfully, professionally, giving the family space. Marcus barely noticed them. His eyes found the couch immediately, found Eleanor, found the dish towel covering her hands, and then found Mia, sitting quietly beside her. Marcus dropped to his knees, pulled both children into his arms. For a long time, nobody spoke. The apartment remained silent except for soft crying. Not dramatic, not loud, just honest grief. The kind that comes when someone mattered. The paramedics eventually left. The apartment emptied. The morning continued. Sunlight crossed the floor. Cars passed outside. The city kept moving, as cities always do. Yet inside apartment 3C, time felt frozen. Hours later, after neighbors brought food and condolences, Marcus finally remembered the card. The white card. Charles Bennett, attorney at law. He found it exactly where he'd placed it, inside a kitchen drawer, waiting. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at the name. For several moments he simply held it. Because calling meant accepting reality. Calling meant acknowledging that Eleanor's story had reached its final page. Eventually, he dialed. The phone rang twice. Then a man's voice answered. Calm, precise, professional, Charles Bennett speaking. Marcus swallowed. My name is Marcus Reed. Silence. Brief. Measured. Then the attorney spoke. I've been expecting your call. Marcus froze. The words felt strange, as though events had already been set in motion long before he understood them. You knew, I knew this day would come. The lawyer's voice softened. Was it Eleanor? Yes. Another pause. Then Bennett continued. She made arrangements. Of course she had. Marcus almost smiled through the grief. Eleanor seemed incapable of leaving chaos behind. Even now, even after death, she was still taking care of details, still protecting people from burdens, still thinking ahead. The attorney spoke again. I'll handle everything. Marcus looked toward the couch, toward the blanket, toward the children sitting together. What happens now? A longer silence followed. Then Bennett answered carefully. Now we wait. For what? The estate process. Marcus frowned. Estate. The word felt oddly formal, oddly large. Eleanor didn't have much. The attorney didn't respond immediately, and somehow that silence said more than words. Marcus felt a strange sensation, a tiny shift, a barely noticeable movement beneath everything he thought he knew. When Bennett finally spoke, his tone had changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Mr. Reed. Yeah? There are things we need to discuss. Marcus stared at the wall, at Danielle's old photograph, at the life he'd spent years trying to hold together. What things? Not today. The lawyer's voice remained calm. Today is for grieving. Marcus didn't understand, but he didn't argue. The conversation ended shortly afterward. The apartment grew quiet again. The children eventually fell asleep on opposite ends of the couch, exhausted, heartbroken. Marcus sat alone in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Eleanor made coffee, the same kitchen where she'd repaired coats and helped with homework and quietly transformed their lives. The empty chair across from him felt impossibly large. For a long time, he simply sat there, thinking, remembering, missing her. Outside, evening settled across Detroit. Streetlights flickered on. Cars rolled through wet streets. Life continued. Inside apartment 3C, however, another story was quietly beginning. Because somewhere beyond the grief, beyond the funeral arrangements, beyond the memories, a lawyer named Charles Bennett was preparing to return to Detroit. And when he finally knocked on Marcus Reed's door 2 months later, he would bring a truth so shocking that it would change everything Marcus thought he knew about Eleanor Whitmore forever. The 2 months after Eleanor's passing felt strangely ordinary. That was the hardest part. The world didn't stop. The rent still came due. The alarm still rang at 4:15 every morning. The warehouse still expected Marcus to show up. Children still needed breakfast. Laundry still needed folding. Homework still needed checking. Life continued, even when part of it was missing. Especially then. Marcus returned to work 3 days after Eleanor's death. Not because he was ready, because he couldn't afford not to. The warehouse looked exactly the same. The forklifts beeped, the loading docks rattled, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Everything felt unchanged. Yet Marcus felt different, as though someone had quietly removed a piece of the foundation beneath him. Not enough to collapse, just enough to notice every day. At home, the absence was louder. The couch remained where it had always been. The blanket still folded across the armrest. The coffee pot still sat on the counter. But mornings felt emptier now. No coffee waiting. No quiet voice asking about his shift. No gentle observations about the weather. Mia noticed it most. One morning she stood staring at the empty couch while eating cereal. Marcus watched her. "You okay, baby?" She nodded, then shook her head, then nodded again. The complicated language of children. "I keep thinking she's going to be there." Marcus swallowed. "So do I." Mia looked down at her bowl. "I miss her." Marcus reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I know." Caleb grieved differently, more quietly, more privately. For nearly 3 weeks, he barely mentioned Eleanor at all. He continued sketching, continued studying, continued helping around the apartment. But Marcus noticed something. The bridge notebook never left his side anymore. Never. One evening, Marcus found him sitting alone at the kitchen table, drawing. The apartment was quiet, the television off. Rain tapping softly against the windows, the familiar Detroit soundtrack. Marcus glanced down. The same bridge, the one Eleanor had corrected, the one she'd studied, the one she'd called worth building. Something had changed. On the far side of the bridge, Caleb had drawn a small figure, an older woman sitting on a bench, waiting peacefully. Not lonely, not sad, just present. Marcus stared for several seconds. "That's nice." Caleb nodded without looking up. Neither said anything more. They didn't need to. Some conversations happen without words. The small memorial service took place on a Saturday afternoon. Nothing elaborate, nothing expensive, just a gathering of people whose lives Eleanor had somehow touched. Reverend Miles from New Hope Community Kitchen came. Mrs. Gloria came. A few neighbors came. Even Derek showed up, though Marcus barely spoke to him. The hurt still lingered. The betrayal wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Trust, once broken, rarely returns in perfect condition. The service lasted less than an hour. Stories were shared, prayers offered, memories exchanged. When it ended, everyone slowly drifted away, leaving Marcus alone beside the church steps, watching the sunset, thinking, remembering, wondering. Because despite everything, one question remained. Who had Eleanor really been? The answer never came, at least not then. Weeks passed. The phone remained silent. Charles Bennett never called. No letters arrived. No explanations appeared. Gradually, Marcus stopped expecting them. Perhaps there wasn't some great mystery. Perhaps Eleanor had simply been an elderly woman with a complicated past. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was the whole story. Then came Thursday, exactly 2 months and 11 days after Eleanor's death. Marcus had just finished unloading groceries. Mia was doing homework. Caleb sat at the table sketching. The apartment felt normal, ordinary, safe. Then a black sedan rolled into the parking lot below. Marcus barely noticed at first. Vehicles came and went all day. But this one looked different. Newer. Expensive. Out of place like a tuxedo at a construction site. The car parked. A tall man stepped out. Gray suit, polished shoes, leather briefcase, silver hair. Everything about him looked expensive, deliberate, professional. The man glanced toward the apartment building, then started walking. Marcus watched from the window. A strange feeling settled in his stomach. 5 minutes later came the knock. 3 precise taps. Not loud, not hesitant, confident. Marcus opened the door. The man stood there exactly as he'd appeared from the window. Perfectly composed. Perfectly calm. "Mr. Marcus Reed?" Marcus nodded. "Yeah." The man extended his hand. "My name is Charles Bennett." Marcus froze. The world seemed to narrow instantly. The name. The white card. The hospital room, Eleanor's voice. "If something happens, call him first." Everything came rushing back. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Bennett nodded politely. "May I come in?" Marcus stepped aside. The lawyer entered. His eyes moved carefully through the apartment. The photographs. The furniture. The old couch. When he saw the couch, something flickered across his face. Recognition. Sadness. Respect. Perhaps all three. Mia appeared in the hallway. Then Caleb. Both immediately sensed something important was happening. Charles Bennett noticed them too. These must be Caleb and Mia. Marcus frowned. "How do you know their names?" The attorney smiled gently. Eleanor spoke about them often. The apartment grew very quiet. Bennett placed his briefcase on the kitchen table. The same table where Eleanor drank coffee. The same table where she studied Caleb's bridges. The same table where she repaired Mia's coat. Marcus suddenly felt nervous. Very nervous. The lawyer opened the briefcase, removed a large envelope, several folders, a leather-bound document. Then he looked directly at Marcus. "What I'm about to tell you may be difficult to believe." Marcus laughed nervously. "That's usually not a great way to start a conversation." For the first time, Bennett smiled. A genuine smile. Brief. Then it disappeared. "I imagine so." He folded his hands, carefully, deliberately, as though preparing to move something extremely fragile. Eleanor Whitmore was not homeless. Marcus stared, not surprised. Not entirely. Somewhere deep down he'd always known that, but hearing it spoken aloud felt different, real. "Okay." Bennett nodded. She was also not poor. Silence. Marcus felt Caleb stop drawing, felt Mia looking back and forth between them. The room seemed to shrink. "How not poor?" Marcus asked. The attorney held his gaze, then quietly answered, "Extremely." Marcus frowned. The word felt insufficient, vague, meaningless. Bennett continued. "Eleanor Whitmore founded Whitmore Capital 43 years ago." The name hit Marcus immediately. Whitmore Capital. The logo, the television, the reaction, the clues. Every strange moment suddenly shifted into place. Marcus stared. "No." Bennett nodded. "Yes." The lawyer opened one of the folders. Photographs slid across the table. Magazine covers, Newspaper articles, corporate events, business awards. Images of a younger Eleanor, elegant, confident, standing beside governors, CEOs, public figures. Marcus couldn't speak. He simply stared. Because the woman in those photographs was unmistakably Eleanor, older now, but undeniably her. The same eyes, the same smile, the same presence. Mia looked at one photo. That's Eleanor. Nobody answered, because there was nothing to add. It was Eleanor. And everything Marcus thought he knew was changing. Bennett took a slow breath, then delivered the sentence that would alter every remaining assumption. At the time of her death, Eleanor Whitmore's personal estate was valued at approximately $431 million. The apartment went completely silent. No traffic, no refrigerator hum, no distant voices. Nothing. Just silence. Marcus blinked once, twice, certain he'd misheard. How much? 431 million. The number didn't sound real. It sounded fictional, like something from television, like something that happened to other people. Not people in apartments with leaking windows, not people working warehouse shifts, not people clipping grocery coupons. Marcus sat down heavily. The chair creaked beneath him. Across the room, Caleb looked stunned. Mia looked confused. Charles Bennett remained calm, patient, as though he'd expected exactly this reaction, because he probably had. Marcus stared at the photographs, then at the lawyer, then at the old couch. The same couch where Eleanor had slept, the same couch where she'd shared coffee, the same couch where she'd spent her final days. And one impossible question echoed through his mind. If Eleanor Whitmore was worth $431 million, why had she chosen to spend her last days here, in apartment 3C, with them? The answer waited inside the leather-bound document resting on Charles Bennett's table. And when the lawyer finally opened it, Marcus would discover that Eleanor's greatest secret wasn't her wealth. It was what she had decided to do with it. The apartment seemed smaller somehow, smaller than it had ever felt before. Charles Bennett sat calmly at the kitchen table. The leather-bound document rested in front of him. Marcus sat across from him. Caleb remained frozen beside the counter. Mia sat quietly on the couch, the old couch, Eleanor's couch. The room carried the strange feeling that often comes before life changes forever. The attorney opened the document carefully, every movement deliberate, every page handled with respect, not because of the money, because of the woman who had written it. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Bennett looked directly at Marcus. Before I continue, there is something you should understand. Marcus swallowed. What? The attorney folded his hands. Eleanor revised her will 8 days before her death. The statement immediately caught his attention. 8 days. That meant after the hospital, after the conversations, after the coffee mornings, after the weeks inside apartment 3C, after she truly became part of their family. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Why? Bennett's expression softened. Because she made a decision. The lawyer opened the document, turned several pages, then began reading. His voice was steady, professional, clear. The sound filled the apartment. Outside, traffic moved through Detroit streets. Inside, nobody breathed. The first pages covered legal matters, corporate holdings, investments, properties, numbers so large Marcus struggled to process them. But then Bennett reached a section written in Eleanor's own words. The lawyer paused, looked up briefly, then continued. I have spent most of my life surrounded by people who wanted something from me. The room became still. Some wanted my money. Some wanted my influence. Some wanted access to rooms they could not enter alone. Marcus lowered his eyes. The lawyer continued. Many of them were polite. Many of them were intelligent. Some were even kind. A pause. Very few expected nothing in return. The words sounded exactly like Eleanor. Measured, honest, uncomplicated. Marcus could hear her voice in every sentence. Bennett continued reading. On a rainy evening in Detroit, a tired father carrying groceries stopped walking. Marcus froze. The lawyer didn't. He did not know my name. He did not know my history. He did not know my net worth. He only knew I was cold. The apartment disappeared. The kitchen disappeared. Marcus found himself back at the bus stop, back beneath the rain, back to the moment everything began. He offered me shelter without questions. He offered me dignity without conditions. Mia quietly wiped tears from her eyes. Caleb stared at the floor. The lawyer's voice remained steady. Most people spend their lives telling you who they are. Marcus Reed showed me who he was in 5 minutes. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. Not pride, not happiness. Something deeper. Something painful. Because hearing Eleanor's words made her absence feel real again. Bennett turned the page. His daughter placed a warm drink beside me before she knew my story. Mia lowered her head. The attorney continued. His son showed me bridges designed by a child who still believes every destination is possible. Caleb's eyes immediately filled. Still nobody spoke. The room had become sacred somehow, as though Eleanor herself were sitting there, sharing one final conversation. Then came the next paragraph, the one that changed everything. Bennett took a breath, then read, I leave the majority of my estate to Marcus Reed, Caleb Reed, and Mia Reed. The words landed like thunder. Nobody moved. Nobody reacted. Not immediately. The sentence was simply too large, too impossible, too unreal. Marcus stared, certain he had misunderstood, certain there had to be more. The attorney continued. I do not leave it to them because they are poor. A pause. I leave it to them because they are rich in the one currency I spent my entire life searching for. Marcus felt tears burning behind his eyes. The lawyer kept reading. Family. Silence. Absolute silence. The refrigerator hummed softly. Cars passed outside. The world continued. Yet inside the apartment, everything had stopped. Marcus Reed gave me a home without asking what I could provide in return. His children reminded me that love still exists in its simplest form. For the first time in many years, I was not viewed as a businesswoman, an investment portfolio, a patient, or a burden. Marcus closed his eyes. Because that was true. All of it. He never asked who she was, never asked what she owned, never asked what she could offer. She had simply become Eleanor. Nothing more, nothing less. The lawyer continued. I leave this estate not as charity. I leave it as gratitude. Then came the final sentence, the sentence that broke everyone. Because in a small apartment in Detroit, I finally found the thing money could never buy. Bennett stopped reading. The room remained silent. For a very long time. Marcus stared at the table, at the old wood grain, at his own hands, at the life he thought he understood. Nothing made sense anymore. $431 million, a number so large it felt fictional. A woman who had quietly eaten burgers at their kitchen table. A billionaire who slept on a worn-out couch. A fortune connected to a family that struggled to pay rent. The contrast felt impossible. Eventually, Marcus found his voice. Barely. Why? The attorney looked at him. Eleanor asked me that same question once. Marcus frowned. What did you tell her? Bennett smiled sadly. The truth. And what was that? The lawyer looked around the apartment, at the photographs, at the drawings on the refrigerator, at the old couch, then back at Marcus. I told her she spent 40 years building wealth. A pause. Then she spent 3 weeks discovering what wealth was for. Marcus couldn't speak, because somehow that answer felt exactly right. The conversation continued for another hour. Legal details, trust structures, foundations, tax protections, financial advisors, words and concepts Marcus barely understood. Yet one thing became clear. The will was valid, ironclad, carefully prepared. Eleanor had anticipated challenges, and there would be challenges. Of course there would. People always appeared when large fortunes were involved. The first challenge arrived sooner than expected. News traveled quickly, far too quickly. Within days, local media learned portions of the story. A wealthy recluse, a Detroit warehouse worker, a surprise inheritance. The story spread. Headlines appeared. Reporters called. Neighbors whispered. People who had ignored Marcus for years suddenly wanted conversations. Mr. Hanson, the landlord, appeared with unusual friendliness. Mrs. Gloria nearly chased him back downstairs. Derek showed up too, looking exhausted, ashamed, regretful. Marcus opened the door. Neither man spoke immediately. The friendship that once felt simple now felt complicated. Derek stared at the floor. I messed up. Marcus nodded. You did. I never meant for any of that to happen. Marcus believed him. That was the hardest part. Derek wasn't cruel, just careless. And sometimes careless damage lasted longer. The silence stretched. Finally, Derek looked up. I'm sorry. Marcus studied him for a long time, then slowly nodded. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of it. After Derek left, Marcus sat alone in the apartment. The documents still scattered across the table. The numbers still impossible. The future still unimaginable. Mia eventually climbed into his lap. Dad? Yeah? Are we rich now? Marcus laughed softly through tears. The question felt perfectly Mia. Perfectly simple. Perfectly impossible. I don't know. She thought about that, then asked, would Eleanor want us to be happy? That answer came easily. Yes. Mia smiled, then rested her head against his shoulder. And for the first time since the lawyer arrived, Marcus finally cried. Not because of the money, not because of the future, because Eleanor wasn't there to see any of it, because the person who changed their lives would never walk through the door again, because sometimes the greatest gifts arrive carrying grief beside them, and because Marcus knew one thing with absolute certainty: whatever he did next, whatever happened with the money, whatever opportunities appeared, he could not allow Eleanor's legacy to become just another fortune. It had to become something more, something that reflected the kindness that started everything. A decision was already beginning to form. And 1 year later, standing beneath a Detroit sky, Marcus Reed would finally understand exactly what Eleanor Whitmore had hoped he would do. The first 6 months after the inheritance were the hardest. Not because of the money, because of the attention. Money changed many things. One of them was visibility. For most of his life, Marcus had been invisible. A warehouse worker, a widowed father, A black man doing everything he could to keep his family afloat. People rarely noticed men like him. Now everybody noticed. Reporters called. Business consultants emailed. Investment firms sent invitations. Strangers offered advice. Distant relatives somehow appeared. People who had never remembered his birthday suddenly remembered his phone number. Marcus hated it. Not because the attention was cruel, because it was exhausting. Every conversation seemed to begin with the same thing. The money, always the money, never Eleanor, never the bus stop, never the old couch, never the kindness that started everything. Just the number. $431 million. Marcus quickly learned something Eleanor probably understood decades earlier. Large amounts of money attracted people, but very few of them cared about the person holding it. Thankfully, Charles Bennett remained involved. So did Augustina Harper. A financial advisor Eleanor had trusted for years. She was 60 years old, sharp, honest, impossible to impress. During their first meeting, she looked directly at Marcus and asked, "Who do you want to become?" Marcus blinked. "What? Everybody asks what you're going to do with the money." She folded her hands. "I'm asking who you're going to become." The question stayed with him. For days, then weeks, then months, because the answer wasn't simple. Marcus didn't want a mansion. He didn't want yachts, private jets, expensive watches. None of it interested him. The only thing he wanted was what he'd always wanted: security, stability, opportunity for his children, and maybe a chance to help people the way Eleanor had helped them. One evening, he sat at the kitchen table reviewing plans with Caleb. The apartment hadn't changed much. Not yet. They still lived there, still used the same furniture, still ate dinner together, still argued over homework. Caleb was now 13, taller, more confident. His bridge notebook remained close by. Always. Marcus glanced at one of the pages, then smiled. "You know." Caleb looked up. "What?" "You were right." "About what?" Marcus pointed toward one of the bridge designs. "You always said bridges aren't really about getting somewhere." Caleb frowned. "They're not." Marcus laughed. "Then what are they about?" The boy thought for a moment, then answered, "Connecting things." Marcus sat quietly afterward, because suddenly he realized that was exactly what Eleanor had done. She connected worlds, a billionaire and a warehouse worker, a lonely woman and a grieving family, wealth and kindness, loss and purpose, a bridge. That's what she had been, a bridge. Several weeks later, the idea finally arrived. Not dramatically, not in a boardroom, not during a meeting. It happened while Marcus was volunteering at New Hope Community Kitchen, the same place he'd volunteered before Eleanor ever entered his life, the same place that helped him after Danielle died. A cold evening, long food line, familiar faces, people struggling, people surviving, people trying. Marcus stood in the kitchen serving soup. An elderly woman entered. Thin coat, tired eyes, plastic shopping bag. The sight stopped him. Not because she looked exactly like Eleanor, because she reminded him of her. For a brief moment, Marcus found himself staring. Then he saw something else. Nobody knew where she would sleep that night. Nobody knew who she was. Nobody knew her story. Exactly like Eleanor. The realization struck him immediately. There were hundreds of people like that. Thousands. Not just in Detroit. Everywhere. Good people. Forgotten people. Lonely people. People one bad month away from losing everything. The idea followed him home, then refused to leave. 3 months later, construction began. The building sat 3 miles from apartment 3C, an old brick property abandoned for years. Broken windows, cracked walls, peeling paint. Most developers wanted to tear it down. Marcus wanted to rebuild it. The project moved slowly, carefully, thoughtfully. He hired local workers, local contractors, local businesses. Every decision mattered. Every choice reflected something Eleanor taught him. Wealth wasn't meant to isolate. It was meant to build. 1 year after Eleanor's death, the project finally opened. The sign stood above the entrance. Simple, elegant. 2 words. Eleanor House. Marcus stared at the name for a long time that morning. The sky above Detroit glowed pale blue. Spring sunlight reflected from nearby buildings. Cars moved through city streets. Life continued, just as it always had. Yet this day felt different. People began arriving before noon. Families, volunteers, community leaders, teachers, former neighbors, even Mrs. Gloria. She cried the moment she saw the sign, then immediately denied it. Everyone ignored her. Inside the building were temporary apartments, job training classrooms, community kitchens, counseling offices, safe places for elderly residents, safe places for single parents, safe places for people who needed a second chance. Everything Marcus wished existed when Danielle died. Everything Eleanor would have loved. The opening ceremony remained small, exactly how Marcus wanted it. No celebrity appearances, no giant checks, no speeches about success. Just people. Real people. Real lives. Real stories. Caleb stood beside him, taller now, confident, holding the bridge notebook. Mia stood on his other side, 9 years old, full of questions, full of life, full of hope. In her hands she carried a small cardboard box. Marcus recognized it immediately. The memory box. The one containing Eleanor's dish towel, her handwritten notes, small keepsakes, tiny pieces of a life. Mia opened it carefully, removed the dish towel, the same one she placed across Eleanor's hands, the same one Eleanor used every morning beside the coffee pot. Marcus felt emotion rising immediately. Mia looked up. "Can we keep it here?" He swallowed. "Why?" She smiled. "Because she belongs here too." There wasn't a person in the room whose eyes remained dry after that. They framed the towel, hung it inside the entrance. Nothing fancy, just a simple frame, a simple reminder. Sometimes the most important things aren't expensive. The afternoon passed quickly. Visitors toured the building. Volunteers signed up. Families moved into temporary housing. Children laughed in hallways. Hope filled rooms that had once stood empty. As sunset approached, Marcus stepped outside, alone, for the first time all day. The air felt warm. The city glowed gold beneath the fading sunlight. He looked up at the sign. Eleanor House. A year earlier, he couldn't afford unexpected car repairs. A year earlier, he was carrying groceries through the rain. A year earlier, a stranger sat alone at a bus stop. Life changed fast. Yet somehow, the most important thing hadn't changed at all. Marcus still believed what he'd always believed. Kindness mattered. Not because it made people rich, not because it guaranteed rewards, because it was right. The front door opened behind him. Caleb stepped outside, holding the bridge notebook. "Dad?" Marcus smiled. "Yeah?" Caleb opened the notebook. Page 23. The bridge. Eleanor's bridge. The one she'd corrected months ago. Marcus stared. Something had changed. On the far side of the bridge stood the small figure of an older woman. The woman remained exactly where she'd always been, sitting peacefully, waiting, watching. But now something new appeared behind her. A building, warm lights, open doors, people entering, people leaving. A home. Caleb smiled, finished it. Marcus looked at the drawing, then at the building behind him, then back at the drawing. His throat tightened. It's perfect. Caleb nodded. I know. They stood together for a moment, watching the sunset, watching people enter Eleanor House, watching kindness continue its journey. Then Mia burst through the doors, running toward them. Dad! Marcus laughed. What now? She pointed toward the sky. Do you think Eleanor can see this? The question stopped him, exactly the way it had 1 year earlier. He looked at the building, at the sign, at the people finding shelter inside, at the life growing from one small act of kindness. Then he smiled, a real smile, the kind that comes from gratitude, the kind that comes from understanding. Yeah, baby. His voice softened. I think she can. And as the evening light settled across Detroit, Marcus finally understood what Eleanor had been trying to leave behind. Not money, not buildings, not investments. A legacy. Proof that kindness survives. Proof that one act of compassion can echo through countless lives. Proof that sometimes the most important bridge you'll ever build begins with simply stopping to help a stranger in the rain. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below and tell us what act of kindness changed your life. When Caleb finally finished the bridge Eleanor once admired, he drew a warm building waiting on the other side. A year earlier, it was only a sketch in a notebook. Now it was Eleanor House, filled with people finding hope because one tired father chose to stop walking and help a stranger. This story reminds us that some of the most important people in our lives arrive without introductions, titles, or explanations. The people who change everything don't always look important when we first meet them. Today, think about one person you usually pass without noticing: the elderly neighbor, the lonely coworker, the stranger sitting alone. Take 10 seconds and offer a simple conversation. Marcus didn't change Eleanor's life with money or power. He changed it by seeing her when everyone else looked away. Have you ever met someone who seemed ordinary at first, but ended up changing your life forever? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story spoke to you, comment 1 so I know it reached your heart. Stay with me because the next story begins with another ordinary moment that will lead to an outcome nobody saw coming.